You like my banner?
Yes, I do. Yeah, when are you going to raffle off the... Where are you going to...
Good morning, everybody. How about that Ohio weather? We took a few days off this week to go visit some relatives in Tennessee. Left over the weekend. There was a holiday on Monday, so we thought, well, that'd be good. The kids will only be out of school 4 days, right? And then Monday we saw that, oh, schools are closed on Tuesday. They got whammered by a blizzard. We thought, oh, good. Now the kids are only out of school 3 days. We came back Thursday night for another blizzard and another snow day. So the kids were only out 2 school days. I'll tell you, it's amazing. It's only a few hundred miles, but 50-degree weather, no sign of snow anywhere. Back here in Ohio, very different thing. At any rate, I'm glad everybody could make it here today. A lot of people would be daunted by this kind of weather, but I'm glad to see we have a lot of patriots that are not. Let's see, do I have my volunteer for the Pledge of Allegiance? I do see him back there. Come on up here, please. And Doug Eastwood volunteered to lead us in the invocation.
Let's pray. Father God, we just thank you and we praise you for just an amazing God that you are. We thank you for giving us, Father, the freedom, the privilege, the ability to live in this country. And we thank you and praise you for the blessings that you've given each one and the gifts, each one in this room. Father, we pray that along with the blessings and the gifts, Lord, that we thank you that we're burdened with the ability and the desire to be good stewards of what you've given to us. Help us, Father. Lead us to do and to serve, to be the people you want us to be, to protect the country that you've allowed us to grow up in. I pray that you would convict us to take roles where we need to take roles. And encourage, Lord, I pray encouragement for the people who are doing things, that we can preserve this for our kids and their kids. But thank you for your help. We pray for your help and your guidance, and we lift this time up to you now. Amen.
Okay, at this time, could I see a showing of hands of people who are here with us for the first time? All right, don't be shy. Thank you for coming. Please make sure you sign in on the guest register outside so we can stay in touch with you. We're a conservative grassroots organization, and what we do is we try to identify other conservatives, get them interested in coming to meetings like this. When they're here, we inform them, try to get them involved, and if they get involved, to empower them to make things happen. We're a big tent. We have Republicans, Democrats, Independents. Everybody makes their own decisions. We're all self-reliant. We believe in self-governance. And we share a variety of views, not all of which are agreed to by the management. But we do keep it civil. Many people are still not accustomed to the $5 charge at the door. That's to pay for the cost of the room. None of that goes to donations or anything else like that. So if you didn't have the opportunity to pay at the door, please do so on your way out, so that we don't have to pay it ourselves. First-time people, of course, the charge is waived, and the charge is waived for octogenarians. Anyway, do we have any elected officials with us today? I did not recognize any. Neither did I see any candidates. Any? Scott's waving his hand back there, but it's somebody else. Never mind. Okay. Since we have no other preliminaries, we're going to hold the announcements to the very end. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our special guest speaker, fresh in from Washington, D.C. last night, Mark Mix with the National Right to Work Committee and National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Mark?
I'm not sure I want to carry that just fresh in from Washington, D.C. banner around too much. I'm just here. Yeah, let's just say that. You know, one of the great lies is that I'm from Washington, I'm here to help. And that is one of the great lies, ladies and gentlemen. But thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the snow. It was an interesting trip in here last night. I was getting on a plane. I have 6 children, and I promised my children on Friday nights that we take them out for dinner, and so I got on a 10:22 flight out of Dulles last night that ended up taking off at 12:43, and then we landed here around 1:45, and then we had a 15-minute exercise in getting the gate to the plane because of the snow. And by the time we got to the hotel last night, it was around 3 o'clock in the morning. So if I fall over and fall asleep up here, just come prop me up and bring me coffee. That would be a good thing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege to be here with you and to be in these pockets of liberty. A wise man once said, "May you live in interesting times." And ladies and gentlemen, we live in interesting times. You here in Ohio are going to be living in interesting times. You already do, but as we begin to introduce a bill that's going to roll back power for a special organization, you're going to see how interesting times are going to manifest themselves very quickly. For those of you who've been watching TV and watching, you know, whatever channel you choose to watch, it's hard to stay out of what's been going on in Wisconsin and up there with Republican Governor Scott Walker and what he's doing with organized labor in the public sector. Let me just lay out a little bit about what I'd like to try to accomplish here today. Most importantly, I want to try to take your questions at the end of this and answer any questions you might have about our issue and questions that you may have of things that I talked about in the speech. And if you disagree with me vehemently during the speech, raise your hand and I'll call on you and we'll have it out right then. Okay? Jim's going to protect me out here, and I appreciate the fact that he said you do this in a civil way. That's a good thing, and that's an important thing. Just let me give you a little bit of my pedigree. I came from a household, a single mom, raised 3 boys until I was about 13, and she remarried, and my stepfather was a 32-year member of the International Association of Machinists with a company called Foster Wheeler in Dansville, New York, kind of a gritty blue-collar town. And there's pictures of young Mark Mix walking on the picket line in 1976 with a sign that says management unfair, and I still believe they're unfair. But my brother is a 4th grade school teacher in Western New York. He was voted, so proud of him, he's my older brother, and he got all the brains. He got all the hair, got all that good stuff. Got the braces, you know, got the college education. I'm a little bitter. But he was voted Western New York Teacher of the Year in Western New York. He was a 4th grade teacher then and just really did his job very well. But unfortunately for my brother, in New York State, the American Federation of Teachers has a hammerlock on the educational system, and my brother wouldn't be able to teach in New York State and teach 4th grade students in a small little school district if he didn't tender dues or fees to a union for the privilege of working. Well, you might think that now of my work at National Right to Work, union officials and union members and other union militants around would think that I'm a prodigal son, but I'm not. My mom still loves me for what I do. My brother still loves me for what I do. And it's exciting to be able to stand up and fight for individuals and individual liberty and individual freedom in the workplace. It's not a marquee issue. It's not guns and taxes and pro-life and homosexual marriage. It's none of that. But I think after we get done today and I walk you through the journey of what's at stake here in Ohio and what's happened in the course of American history and how it's been affected since 1935 and Franklin Roosevelt, you'll see that this is a seminal issue and a seminal time for those of us in America that believe in controlling our government. We're really at a tipping point. I believe that. And so it's nice to be with you here today on this snowy day and have you come out and spend a little time with me. And thanks for the opportunity, Jim. I really appreciate that. First, let me tell you about the National Right to Work Committee and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. The National Right to Work Committee is a 2.5 million member organization. Homer got a mailing letter from me just yesterday. Appreciate that. He said the check was in the mail. That's another great lie, too. No, it's not. Thank you. Thank you. But we've been around since 1955, and our primary mission is very simple. We believe that every individual must have the right to join a union but no one should be compelled as a condition of employment to pay dues or fees to get or keep a job. 8 out of 10 Americans believe like we do. I believe, and I will talk about this a little bit later, I'll give you a recipe for organized labor to go back and win the hearts and minds of workers and win the hearts and minds of people like you, if they'll just accept it. Unlikely they will, but we'll talk a little bit about that. The National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation has been around since 1968, and our primary mission there at the foundation is to provide free legal aid to employees who've had their rights violated by compulsory unionism arrangements. And we've had a lot of work here in Ohio, quite frankly. We've had many cases here in Ohio on behalf of teachers and state employees who have decided that they don't like what the union is doing with their dues, which they have to pay as a condition of their employment in Ohio. They turn around, union officials turn around and use that in politics or to promote causes which individuals oppose. And so our job is simply to provide free legal aid to those workers. They find us through the internet, they find us by the phone, they find us by word of mouth, by media, by speeches like this. And it's been our privilege to take employee cases to the United States Supreme Court 14 times on behalf of workers. We have our own legal staff. We don't hire outside lawyers. Our lawyers are underpaid. No lawyer's underpaid, are they? There is an underpaid lawyer in America. But anyway, they're underpaid. But it has been a real privilege. Over the course of the last 30 plus years, we've represented over 400,000 employees across the country. 2 of the seminal cases that we've litigated, one was called Communication Workers versus Back, where we took a telephone lineman off a telephone pole in La Plata, Maryland. We took him through the National Labor Relations Board process, and we took him to the steps of the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that Harry Beck was right. He couldn't be compelled to pay for causes which he disagreed, and the union couldn't force him to pay that as conditions of employment. Now, you may think that's a great victory, and we thought it was a great victory in 1988 when we won that battle. But unfortunately, it's not self-enforcing. So union officials kind of thumb their nose at Harry Beck's rights. But we continue to look for cases across the country that have those types of precedential setting facts to expand those rights to every worker across the country. And it's been very rewarding to do that. We've had several cases here in Ohio in the private sector as well, and Dana Corporation up in Sandusky, Ohio. We've represented some really, really true freedom fighters up there that have just stood up and been courageous. It's pretty hard to stand up in a union hall and say anything that goes against the grain. My SEIU member back there, my friend who's running the camera, knows a little bit about that. So that is in context what the National Right to Work Committee and National Right to Work Foundation do. It's been my privilege to do this work for 25 years. They got me out of high school and kind of out of high school and out of college, and I went to work for them. And I traveled the country running legislative programs in 15 or 16 states. Never had a chance to be out of New York State prior to getting a job with the Right to Work. I got to see the whole country. It's a great country, ladies and gentlemen, you know that. But it's been a privilege to be out working for this cause. It is a labor of love. Another wise man said that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I think I've worked 3 days in my life. One was 2 days ago, but I won't talk about that. But let's talk a little bit about what's happening in Ohio and what you can expect. And I'll kind of fold in Wisconsin, and I'll fold in some of the national stuff, and I'll fold in anything else you want to talk about. But I want to stick to what is at stake here in Ohio and what you're going to be seeing over the next couple of weeks, starting probably on Tuesday, as a matter of fact, as the Senate Insurance and Labor and Commerce Committee hears Senate Bill 5, which was introduced by Senator Jones. This bill is similar to some of the things that are happening in Wisconsin. And let me just explain contextually what's going on there, and hopefully give you kind of a full-orbed view of what's happening, what the reality of this is. There's a lot of rhetoric out there, ladies and gentlemen, and we need to kind of sort through that and to make sure we're getting the right message. Going back all the way back to 1935 in the country, Franklin Roosevelt decided that he was going to take all federal labor management relations from the states and move it to Washington. It's kind of a track record of doing that stuff, on and on and on, and it's still increasing with rapidity even today. But what he said was, we're going to create a federal labor policy that will manage the relationships of private sector workers and their employers. And it was arguably done to help promote workers, but what it's turned out to be has been a kind of full employment law for organized labor. 1935, the Wagner Act passes. The Supreme Court says we don't think this is going to be constitutional. Franklin Roosevelt literally threatens to pack the court in 1937, saying he was going to add 6 new justices to make sure that the Supreme Court would uphold the constitutionality of what we think is a violation of the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. We still do. We still fight it that way. But Roosevelt threatens to pack the court switches in time, they save 9, and this now becomes the law of the land. Forced unionism in America does not come from Ohio for private sector employees, it comes from Washington. There is no law on the books in Ohio that says private sector workers are forced to pay dues to get or keep a job. It comes from Washington. So one of the things we do at National Right to Work is try to beat that law back in Washington, D.C. But from 1935 to 1947, organized labor grew dramatically in the country. And they exercised their power with an iron hand. And the best example of that is John L. Lewis, who was the United Mine Workers president. During World War II, he threatened to shut down the mine production that was making steel, that was making war materials to help our men and women who were fighting for freedom and liberty in World War II. 1947 rolls around and Congress says, you know, we might have gone too far, giving power to union officials like that. And so Robert Taft, Senator Robert Taft from Ohio, and we've talked to his legislative director at the time, I believe he's still alive, I think he's 96 years old or 97 years old, he lives in Ohio. And he said that Senator Taft was interested in repealing the entire National Labor Relations Act. But as you know, both in Columbus and in Washington, generally compromises the order of the day. So instead of repealing the federal law, they just further regulated it. But in one part of the law, they passed what is known as the Taft-Hartley Act and Section 14B of the Act. Now, I'm not going to quiz you on this later, you need to know these citations, but 14B is really what made right to work possible. And so 14B says that while we understand that the federal government controls labor management relations over all private sector workers in the country, we're going to allow states, if they can affirmatively, to outlaw the closed shop. So in 1947, Senator Taft marshals through this little provision in law that allows the states to kind of preempt federal law. For those of you who know the preemption doctrine, usually federal law preempts state law. In this case, the state can pass what are known as right-to-work laws and outlaw closed-shop unionism. So far, 22 states have done that. The last one was Oklahoma in 2001, where Governor Frank Keating stood up and fought for workers' rights in Oklahoma, and it's paid dividends for that state as they immediately started increasing job growth, manufacturing job growth, high-paying jobs. They led the nation in the percentage increase in manufacturing jobs for the 5-year period right after right to work went into effect. Right to work is not only good policy, but it's good politics as well, and Frank Keating understood that, and we got the law passed. We are currently involved in several fights to pass right to work laws. We're not talking about that per se in Ohio at this time, but we're talking about another power structure that is built up at the state level. Go back to 1984. Governor Dick Celeste, I believe, was the guy that was in charge at that time. And it was then that Ohio adopted what is now known as the statewide bargaining law. You note I don't use the word collective bargaining law, because while collective is the right term to use for the kind of the socialistic system that it establishes, it's not a word that carries any weight with us because it really isn't collective bargaining for workers. It's monopoly bargaining for union officials. And over the course of the last 30-plus years, that law has been in place in Ohio. And while economic times are good, the impact of this bargaining law and this power given to a private organization has manifested itself and metastasized itself in the public policy process to a point where it never really got exposed as long as revenue kept flowing in and times were good and we didn't have an economic slowdown. But what's happened over the last 3 or 4 years is as the economy has slowed and the revenue structure in state governments has begun to get on rough roads, if you will, it has exposed, I think clearly, the power that organized labor officials have over you and I as taxpayers. And this is a private organization, remember, and I'll get to that a little bit as we move through this quickly, for your sake. But so, for that period, we now have a law in place that authorizes a small group of union officials to negotiate on behalf of all state employees at the local level. I think there's like 3,200 bargaining units in Ohio. There's 360,000 public employees in Ohio. But these bargaining units are designed, and it's kind of a nice notion. You think of, well, we all want to get together, we want to talk about terms and conditions of employment, and it's the right thing to do. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is the right thing to do. But as Samuel Gompers said, and Samuel Gompers was, quote, the father of the AFL at the turn of the century, 1900s, Samuel Gompers understood that a group that's brought together voluntarily is inherently stronger than one that's cobbled together through compulsion. Just like here today. No one's compelled to be here today. We can't force you to come. I guess Jim can force you to pay the $5, but he can't force you to be here today. Unfortunately, in labor law, we have allowed a private group of individuals to compel people to join them. In 1935, when unions went to Congress and said, hey, why don't you give us this law, and Roosevelt agreed, Gompers had talked about this 10 years previously. I think in 1924 was the last time he ever addressed the AFL convention. He died before 1935. But he said the workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. Anything else is a menace to their rights. And that which is brought together through voluntarism is inherently stronger than anything that's pulled together through compulsion. Gompers pleaded with the delegates of the AFL convention not to go to government for power, but continue to provide services to individual workers that would benefit them. And it's like the old movie Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. And organized labor has a role in the marketplace. They have a role in the private sector. When employees want to join together voluntarily, we need to defend that right. But in the government sector, it's a completely different model. You, better than most, understand the nature of government. Government is where we, the people, have given up certain rights and allowed this institution to use the power of force over us. Government is a reflection of we, the people. It is not a private business. By definition, government provides only necessary services. There is not a substitute for the police force. There is not a substitute for the fire department. We know there's a substitute for the educational structure, but that's another issue altogether. They tell us that education, there is no substitute for the government school system, but in fact there is. But, you know, what happens when you grant a small group of individuals a monopoly over a monopoly? Well, what we're seeing is the manifestation of that in Wisconsin, the manifestation of that in Ohio, the manifestation of that in Missouri and other states where people are marching. In Indiana, a state that I'm very familiar with right now, where we're working heavily to pass a right-to-work law, the Democrats left the state there too. They walked out and went to Illinois. I'll talk a little bit about that. But so the understanding of when you hear the rhetoric on the news and in the newspaper this coming week saying you're violating collective bargaining rights, first of all, we need to define the word collective, and then we need to define the word rights. We have overused the word rights in America. Just completely overused it. And everybody thinks there's rights to this and rights to that. And frankly, there is no right here, per se. We cannot provide, in Franklin Roosevelt, 1935, when they were passing this federal law over private sector workers, someone came to him and said, Mr. President, why don't we do this for government employees as well? And Franklin Roosevelt, who probably, in my mind, other than the president that's currently serving in the White House, has done more damage to liberty and American way of life, said this about that. He said, it is unthinkable that we would apply the private sector unionization model to the public sector. The public sector is providing necessary services, and to think that workers would withhold those necessary services until their demands are met is unthinkable and intolerable. Franklin Roosevelt. You won't hear those words in Columbus on Tuesday. You won't hear those words in Madison, Wisconsin, as they continue to debate that bill, and whether or not the Democrats come back to the Senate there or not is still remains up in the air. But Franklin Roosevelt understood the distinction between the two. So what's happening now in Ohio? Senate Bill 5, introduced by Senator Jones, I believe, Shannon Jones, is not going to repeal bargaining. It's simply going to reform it. In fact, now, workers, state employees, and local employees will still be able to bargain over wages, but they will not bargain over sick leave and unpaid time off and vacation days and all those other things that are wrapped up in an employment contract. Now, if you read the papers and watch union officials' response to this, you'd think that the world was ending. That the world was ending, that this was it. That a free society will break down and it will end up in tatters if we don't allow the continuation of this monopoly over the workers of Ohio and, most importantly, the taxpayers of Ohio. The bill also does a few things about, you know, believe it or not, union officials have used their power in the school system to be able to negotiate over what textbook to use, what the class size will be, where people get staffed. And one of the most interesting things about the union movement that compels me to be involved in this fight and makes me passionate about it is the notion of, you know, they don't want to reward anyone for good service. Anyone who does better work or the other, instead of getting a pay raise or getting rewarded for that better effort, gets hit on the back and says, slow down, buddy, you're making us all look bad. So in Ohio today, the only way you get a pay raise as a teacher is stick around for 1 year longer. And can you be fired? No, very unlikely you get fired. So it takes the best teachers and the worst teachers and the middle teachers and it throws them all into one big pile. And the very people they claim to be helping, the children, are the ones that suffer from that. You know, it was Albert Shanker, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, bless his heart, he's now passed away, but he led the American Federation of Teachers with kind of an iron fist. And he was asked one time by a newspaper in Jackson, Mississippi, I believe it was. This was 1985. In a rare moment of candor, Albert Shanker said this. He said, when children start paying union dues, we'll start representing children. And ladies and gentlemen, that's about where we are with the Ohio Education Association. I don't want to cast a broad brush because there are great teachers in Ohio. You know it. You all know it. You remember your third grade teacher, Mrs. Baker. She was mine. She was a great teacher. She instilled a sense of value in me and a sense of integrity in me that I'll never forget. Changed my life. But to think that somehow union officials, who probably aren't in the classroom, most of them, can hide behind Mrs. Baker and say, you've got to give us this power over those teachers. And you've got to let us fire someone who won't tender $38 an